What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Hey, how you doing? For today's video, I'm so excited to be giving you guys an interview that I just did with Mark Knowles. Mark Knowles is the author of two of my favorite books from this year, and that is ARGO and JASON. These two books are retelling Jason's journey, his mythological journey, from Colchis in Greece all the way to Colchis on the Black Sea to retrieve the Golden Fleece. Except this time around, we get it as historical fiction. As you guys saw, I completely fell in love with these two books to the point where as soon as I finished Jason, I sent Mark Knowles actually a DM on Instagram to be like, please chat to me on my YouTube channel. And luckily he did. And our chat was absolutely everything that I could have hoped for. We dove into the character of Jason, the character of Heracles, the idea of the Greeks even getting in a boat like this and sailing all the way on the Black Sea to this uncharted territory, what it would mean for them. But not only did we chat about Jason and the ancient Greeks and their journey, but we also chatted about Mark Knowles' journey from studying classics at school to then ending up on a reconstruction of an ancient Greek boat when he was 17, which is a wild story in of itself, then going into the Metropolitan Police and only then finding his way back to classics and back to the current position that he is in as head of classics at Harrogate School. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this interview and let's just roll into it. All right, Mark, so I actually wanted to start this chat by not actually talking about the book itself. And that's because I've had a burning question, which is going to sound really weird, but I'm going to read out on the last flap of the book, the inside flap. There's a little bio of you. And it reads, Mark Knowles took degrees in classics and management studies at Downing College, Cambridge. After a decade working as a frontline officer and supervisor within the Metropolitan Police Service, he became head of classics at school in Harrogate. He is a particular fan of experimental archaeology and rode on the reconstructed ancient Athenian, is it trireme?
A trireme, yeah.
A trireme Olympias during its last sea trials in Greece of 1994. So that is an incredibly interesting life in like a couple of sentences. Let's start with the bottom one. How in the world did you end up on this boat?
Good question. It's a bit of a long. I'll keep it. The short story is that back in 1984, so when I was too young to row on a reconstructed Bronze Age ship that was that went from to try and reconstruct the voyage of Jason. 1984, an explorer called Tim Severin got together a crew, and it's mainly university students, to row from Greece to what was Soviet Georgia through the Black Sea, a journey of 1,500 miles. Now, he'd done various other reconstruction. He rowed across the Atlantic in a boat, for example, and he wanted to prove whether it was possible for men to actually do that, to complete the journey under oar and sail. And it was possible. He completed it with no more than maybe 20, 25 people. And most Bronze Age ships would have had 50, perhaps, oarsmen. So basically, back in school about 1992 or 3, you may remember this, when teachers, when teachers don't want, it was the end of term, they'll wheel in a video or something just to kind of watch that for 50 minutes. Now back in the early 90s, VHS was these massive video recorders wheeled in on like a drinks trolley, and really good teacher, but I could tell he was the end of term, he just wanted just to sort of sit back and watch video. And it was a 4-part version of Tim Severin's voyage, really grainy footage, and it's available on YouTube now. Actually, it's really worth a watch. So I watched this. See, a lot of the other kids in the class were a bit bored, and so, but I was absolutely mesmerised by it. And I swear, if ever he was going to do another voyage, I would somehow try and get on it. And it never happened. But in 1992, a teacher, probably the same teacher, in fact, went on a place on Olympias, which was that boat that was mentioned. So I was getting on to an age where I could maybe in a couple of years have a go. And he loved it. He brought back these videos and pictures, and I just soaked it up, and I just wanted desperately to go on it. And then 2 years later, there was a call came out for oarsmen for the sea trials in 1994 around the Greek island of Poros, and I just jumped on it. And I was 17, and I think I was the second youngest. There was a lad from I think Eton, who's 15 years old, who's a kind of a good oarsman. I'd never rowed at all, apart from on a lake, perhaps on a on a duck lake. Sorry. And yeah, so I always think in life, just before if you overthink something, you'll never do it. So just jump in, worry about the details later, get your place, and everything else will fall into. And that's exactly what happened. So I spent 2 weeks in naval barracks in Poros with mainly university students. Probably a little bit, maybe a year or two young, too young for the kind of the university patter and that sort of. But they were lovely. They took me under their wing. It was hard work to try and avoid the heat of the day. We rowed from maybe 5 a.m. till about 10 or 11. Then we had a bit of a break and then got back on the boat maybe 3, 4, maybe 4 o'clock to sort of sunset. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And there is no better way of appreciating what life was perhaps like for ancient oarsmen than just to get involved with something like that. And it really just sort of it planted a seed, I think, for the future that had to be revisited. I was already sort of studying classics, Latin, and it helped. It genuinely that was how I sold it to mum and dad. This will really help. I mean, it's not going to pass you an exam, but it kind of fires the spirit a little bit. So I loved it, and actually I was really lucky because that was the last year that I think it started to develop some kind of rot after that. And so the Greeks, prior to the Olympics, the Greeks had a little bit more money in the economy, so they managed to sort of restore it. But I think it had one more outing in the London Olympics on the River Thames, and that was it. And now it's in a museum on Dry Dock.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, somewhere. I've not been to it there, but it's somewhere in Athens. So, but it's safe, it's sound. It just won't ever go in the sea again. So I was very lucky. That was the last year that it was ever on the sea. So
you had that incredible experience, but you said that you were studying classics during it or before. So how did you get into classics then?
I want to ask you that question as well, because you're the sort of generation after me, I think, really, aren't you? Basically, I'll show you this. I took this from school. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the Cambridge Latin course?
Yes.
Did you do the Cambridge Latin course?
I did do the Cambridge Latin course.
But this was the very first book. I got it from the school office. And that was black and white kind of pictures. That was what I was brought up on.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with no internet, so no online resources. No, it wasn't really. I don't think there's anything in colour at all in terms of the textbooks that we had. But it was just the images of Pompeii in time, and the kind of the people caught in the last moments of their lives. It just fired my imagination. And I was lucky enough to get an assisted place to a good school in Manchester. Without that, there was no way we'd have been able to afford it at all. Just got hooked. What was probably year 7, 11 years old onwards, really. And I think most of the other kids in that particular class hated it, so it was easy to kind of stand out a little bit, really. And I just kind of followed it all the way through to A level with ancient history. I loved it. So then, with all this love for classics, what led you to the police? Yeah, I mean, basically, I always envied people that knew exactly what they wanted to do in some way. I'd never, friends that perhaps wanted to be lawyers since they were 13. I mean, good on them, but never had that really. I always wanted to be an archaeologist. It was from almost before I could speak, just fascinated with dinosaurs and bones, and it always seemed to be that seemed to be the kind of direction. So, but it never really it maybe informed the degree, but I didn't really kind of do anything with that. So I joined, went down to London, did some work in the city, just not me at all really. It was okay in 2000, which obviously a long time ago. The .com boom was kind of was good. It was kind of growing, and it was kind of quite good to be. There's a bit of money around. But when that burst, the job I was in became very salesy, and I'm rubbish at sales. I've mentioned this before. Cold calling, sales, just So I thought, well, I've kind of sold out a bit here, and I'm not really doing what I want to do. Various other jobs. I worked as a sort of fitness coach and a boxing instructor for a bit, and then was walking past a police recruitment station in Victoria. And I was at the time I was maybe 25, wanted to make a real decision. It's like, now is the time to get this right. So either join Sandhurst, the army, or or perhaps the policing. And the one thing that most people really like about the prospect of joining the army is the travel, seeing all these amazing places. But I just never really wanted to be displaced. I just want to kind of have a base and not keep being displaced. So the policing seemed to be the best option. And at the time, it was in a really good state. The economy was good. There were a good number of police officers. Morale was brilliant. Crime rates were low. And not to get political, but it was a good example of the era that, more cops on the street, less crime. People are happier. People feel safer. It was well led. It wasn't political to the same degree perhaps it is now. So it's a good time to join. Again, at the right place. I think I got very lucky. Loved it. Camaraderie was great. We obviously, you see a few things that are pretty kind of you wouldn't necessarily want to see, but that's just part and parcel of the job. But so I loved it, absolutely loved it for most of the 10 years. And I think most people say actually careers these days are maybe 10 years duration. So I think that's about right, really. And you just know when the time is right to change. I suppose in many ways it's inevitable that classics had to play a part in that, coming back to it. And I certainly wasn't alone in that. I know a few other people that worked in various other jobs and went back to teach. And classics seems to be the one that really kind of draws people back.
And did you always want to be a teacher, or were you?
No.
Oh.
No. The answer for the purpose of the interview was, yeah, of course. It was always in the plan. Absolutely not. And I think I'm safe to say it now, but I was just getting a bit fed up with policing. There are various sort of reasons that that politically it was getting difficult, assault on paying conditions. Anyway, so I've probably been grumpy about it too many days. So I remember going to the gym and my wife, right? You've always said, if you're not happy with something, do something about it. So anyway, I just came back, and she'd found a job advert online, and it would have involved a relocation. But I thought, Harrogate, I don't really know much about it. It's a nice place, nice part of the world, but this could be quite a good sort of interview, good practice to see what I'm up against and what I need to do if that was something, if classics was something to pursue. So I went to this interview with very, very little expectation at all. And fell in love with the school kind of on site. It was just like a really vibrant place. They obviously valued classics, and what's more, they were prepared. I think preferably they'd have wanted somebody with a PGCE, but they were prepared for the right person to pay for somebody to learn sort of on the job, as it were. And it just so happened, again, right place really. There was a course that was towards people that wanted to kind of, that couldn't perhaps afford 3 years or 2 years, out, and they paid for it. And that's exactly what happened. It was quite intense for a couple of years, but trying to learn how to teach, how to run a small department, and learn, get through the PGC. But they were really, really helpful and supportive. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, well, this all just sounds like right place, right time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's life. I said that one thing, you get to 40 odd, and you just think, you just got to just throw your hat in the ring, have a go. A lot of the time things won't come off, but you'll learn something from it, perhaps make contact. And I think you just got to just jump in and see what happens.
Is that the attitude that you had towards writing the books, or were the books on the back burner for a while, or were they just you know what, I'm going to write this thing because everybody seems to be interested in it?
Yeah, it was perhaps that was just an odd moment, really. I'd written a book called The Consul's Daughter, which is a sort of loosely based on a historical event, but it was definitely informed by a couple of episodes in the police, really. And that was taken on by a small publishing house in London. But ARGO was just, I just remember being sat on the couch, it's sort of with a kind of the Christmas malaise after Christmas Day, feeling a bit like you've eaten too much and you're drunk. So I just sat on the couch, and I just got my wife's laptop, and she was heavily pregnant with our first. And I thought, well, if you're going to write something, now is the time, because when baby comes, that's the end of free time as you know it. So, and I don't really know why it just came out, the sort of few thousand words. and by writing a few thousand words in a day, that's all. I know a lot of authors can do that, but that's quite rare for me anyway. And it was the first scene of a stormy night, and the palace at Iolcos being invaded by Pelias, who's quite a visual, a big birthmark on his face, quite an angry man. And that was it, just a few thousand words. Read it back the next day and thought, I might as well keep going. Just keep going. And after about 9,000 words, just sent it to my agent, and that's probably about 2019 maybe. But yeah, there was no grand plan. It was just felt like in order to keep this agent, I had to kind of productive and write something. Otherwise, he'd just forget about me and quietly drop me from his list. So that's what happened really. It was just there'd been a few other attempts at stories, in the years since The Consul's Daughter was written and then published, but they didn't really come to anything. And he mentioned, one of the things he mentioned, the first was rubbish, and he just said it's joke. He said there's definitely promise here, but he says in light of Circe, you might want to. And I I didn't even know who Madeline Miller was at the time. I'd seen the book. I mean, that seems inconceivable. Anyone could not know who she is now, doesn't it? So I read Circe after I'd submitted, and was kind of blown away by it. And of course, The Song of Achilles was 7 years earlier. That was really so. Yeah, and obviously she's spawned a whole, I think, almost single-handedly spawned a sort of this whole kind of interest in mythology. But yeah, my that Argo didn't come from that. It was just a moment of guilt almost, really, and wanting to get, maybe it was just this story that had been gestating for a long, many years since rowing on the nets. I think that's probably more it. I just wanted to have something set on a boat.
Well, I was going to ask about that because I only knew about the boat journey that you took like after I finished Argo, and I was like, surely that would have helped write this whole thing because you actually understood what, the times you would spend on the boat. Whereas like if I were writing a voyage, I'd be like, I presume that they row from sunrise to sunset, and then maybe they stop and they sleep for a bit, and then they get back on the boat, and maybe one of them gets a blister. Like I wouldn't know what to do with that, but you had first-hand experience, so surely that made it a lot smoother to write, I imagine.
Yeah, it definitely helped. And I must say though, I think so. The trireme would have had maybe 170 oarsmen and maybe 20 marines on deck. You couldn't really get many more than that, I think, for it to be safe. Whereas the reconstruction of Tim Severin's Argo back in 1984 had, I think there was funding was one of the issues, that he a Greek shipwright to build it in the old style, and there are very few of those around. I don't think there are any of them around now, but he struggled to find one man able to build it, and it became his passion project. So that was 20 oarsmen. So undoubtedly his journey was a lot harder, and those guys were really suffering at the end of 1,500 miles and 3 months, I think. But nevertheless, it was still quite hard work. Not least because on a trireme on Olympias, and depending on where you're at, you can't see your oar, so you're kind of rowing blind. You're just trying to kind of time your stroke a fraction of a second behind the guy in front, and otherwise you'll keep scraping his back. The thing is, you can go on about this for a long, and I won't bore you with this.
No, this is not boring at all.
But when Olympias was reconstructed, I'm trying to remember some of the data on this now. When it was reconstructed, they got the measure slightly wrong. I think because they used the wrong cubit, and obviously cubits are quite an elastic kind of form of measurement, really. Obviously men in ancient Greece were much smaller, significantly smaller, good few inches at least. So their reach would be short. So whilst the dimensions of that they were working with may well have worked for men at 5'7", 5'6", that sort of, and they could have completed a full stroke from catch to pick up to without touching the guy in front, it wasn't so easy for us. So I just kept scratching the guy's back in front, and he was a lovely bloke, but he got, certainly by the end of it, he was getting a bit fed up with this. you know, this guy clawing at him from behind. So I wasn't taking a full stroke, and even as really, amateur oarsman, I knew that wasn't full power. So the performance of that boat was significantly lower than boats in the ancient Athenian navy, and that almost alone would have been one of the reasons, because we just couldn't we're just too big for it. So if it was going to be built again, there were all sorts of theories about how to kind of camp the seats differently so you get a fuller catch. But these are the sort of things that these sea trials kind of throw up. You basically show that inevitably you're not going to get it right first time. But the performance of the ancient Athenians and so on would have been, it was so far ahead of what we were doing, and we thought we were quite fit and strong at the time. But these guys were something else.
So what drew you to Jason then? Like, through this whole experience then, I understand the boat connection, even though, as we've discussed, there's lots of difficulties with that. That makes sense, but what stood out about Jason in particular that you were like, it's his story, rather than, because you could have told the story from anybody's point of view. There are lots of men on that boat. So what was it that made you relate to Jason in particular?
Well, there's a Hollywood version of Jason, isn't there? Who's inevitably I think it was Todd Armstrong that played him in the 50s, 60s maybe, who's a handsome guy, thick hair. So there's that. And he plays him as a noble character, quite straight. And then there's the Jason that's mainly come through from Euripides, really, isn't? And he's a ship, isn't he? There's no two ways about it. But I think the issue is that my only apart, so somewhere in between the Hollywood version and the Euripides version, there is probably there's some middle ground there, and I think people have been so disparaging of the Jason that comes through from that one play. You think, well, that it's a great play, and Euripides is fantastic playwright, but there must be another. Why is the guy famous in the first place? And that turns to definitions of what it is to be a hero in the ancient Greek world, and of course it's different than firemen rescuing a child from a burning building or something. That's maybe a modern day hero, but it's not an ancient Greek hero at all. And I think it was the fact that everything was arrayed against him. It drew me into it. That's a classic kind of. It just seemed like such a good catch for a story. What does a boy of 20? How can he possibly expect to lead a boat of heroes who are more identifiable as heroes in the ancient Greek sense, like Heracles, Meleager, and the twins Castor and Pollux? How does he go about that? And I think it was as much as anything, it was like a psychological kind of journey for me. And obviously that could lead into the kind of the rite of passage, how to become a man. In learning how to lead these warriors, he becomes a man. So there's a transformation within him. But he's got to do it because his birthright depends upon it, and lives, the way I set it up, his mum and dad's lives depend upon it as well. So it seemed like the stakes were right, the kind of the narrative arcs there. But getting Jason right, I'm sure there are plenty of things that have not been done right, but it was hard. And certainly the first draft, when it went to my agent, was like, it's too linear. I'm not really seeing it. And then I saw Moana with my daughter, and you know what? I maybe shouldn't admit it, but there was just a line in there that I had to run away to the laptop and just get something down, because there was a line I thought, I can't believe it, that is it. Where she's forbidden from leaving the island, and then there's that amazingly powerful song about staring at the edge, staring at the horizon, and wondering what lies beyond it, feeling the call of the sea calling her. And I can't remember the line now, but it was. I thought, that's it. There's got to be some like visceral urge within him to get on to see the world, and to he's feeling like a calling. And that was where I thought, well, there's got to be some agency driving him from Mount Pelion back to the plains of Iolcos. And that's where these sort of voices in his head came from. And of course, there's already an existing storyline about why Hera in particular was so offended by King Pelias and wanted a revenge on him, because he disrespected somebody at her at a shrine, well, actually killed somebody at her shrine and spat the creamy white marble blood with the blood of a suppliant, and she wasn't going to do that. So I thought, yeah, that could be the supernatural element, but I really wanted to ground it in sort of realism, I think. And initially, actually, the story was almost a bit more in my own head anyway, more of a Bernard Cornwell sort of gritty kind of, like a Nordic kind of pirate raid upon the Black Sea. And that was how I kind of initially envisaged it, with the least appropriate man leading them.
Well, I loved your Jason because I really did, like, as you were saying, with the Euripides play, it is, like, Euripides is basically canon at this point. Like, he is just such a phenomenal playwright. And that play with him in Medea, which is called Medea, is obviously incredible. And we love it. Like, I think everybody loves that play for his craftsmanship, for the characters, for the scenes. It's stunningly beautiful, but we do judge Jason basically from that. And I don't think he shouldn't be judged from that, because he was very immature and he shouldn't have said like 90% of the things he said to Medea, but there's a whole other story behind that. So when people see him through the Medea lens, we also have to remember it's from her lens, not from Jason's lens. So I'm sure if that play was from his point of view, it would be, wow, she was really unreasonable in this moment, and I have no idea why she's mad at me and all of this. So it is, all of that is important to take into consideration. And I think I forgot the whole Jason part before as well. So reading your book reminded me of it. And I was like, oh yeah, that is why we like him, because he is immature and a child, but he's trying to, like, these are all massive heroes. This is like the Avengers of the ancient world. And you've got Jason, who's never done anything up until that point.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was the challenge, really, to sort of to reconcile all of those things, and make them all a slightly different people. You know, by the time they get to the end of it, and of course they don't quite get to the end of the whole mission at the end of Argo, but and I think just putting a bit of a slightly different spin on the other characters as well. I wanted them to be a sort of load of misfits. That really appealed to me. Why would they want to abandon, if their lives were so great, why would they want to abandon all of that and risk their lives on somebody else's mission? So I thought that was one of the, you know, it's not a plot spoiler, but it's one of the points that they have to really work together, and they identify the need to work together on a beach when they've lost a couple of men. One of them, they have to work together, and they realize that actually that life's dealt them a similar hand in the fact that they're all exiles, essentially. So that's the backstory. Why are they all exiles? What is it about, say, Meleager, such a sort of gentle warrior? Why is he being driven away? And then you've got Idas, the spearman from the southern Peloponnese, who's and that's the only kind of hook that we're given with the other characters, really, is in Apollonia Nautica, that he calls Idas the braggart. And that was it, that one word. I thought, well, we can do something with that. Let's make this guy the thorn in Jason's side, the kind of arrogant warrior that's all about himself, refers to himself in the third person. But ultimately, I want them all to come together into a brotherhood. And that was book 2, if you like, that had to be the kind of the end point, really.
Well, I loved Meleager. Meleager was my favorite character in the whole, like, two books. Well, mainly because I like whenever him and Orpheus, actually, I love both of them. But Meleager, because he is very gentle, but also when people keep asking him about home, he talks about how his wife is really mad at home. And I just loved that detail. That he was always like, yeah, I'm here and I have to get home because otherwise she's going to yell at me. And I was like... And
she's a formidable woman, Atalanta, you know, that... And it's interesting that Jennifer Saint, of course, has written. I can't wait to get my hands on that book.
I just finished it. It's very different, and that's what I've wanted to remind people of, because since I put up my review of Argo, one of the main responses is everyone saying, oh, well, Atalanta's coming out, you know, so we can pit them up against, see who did it better. And I'm like, well, you can't. One is a historical fiction novel, obviously yours, for people who don't know, that's what your books are. They're grounded in historical fiction. So there's no magical element to them. And you go by one particular mythology, you follow that. That's fine. Jennifer Saint, though, takes a completely different mythology and makes it a Greek mythological retelling. So it is magical. And there are totally different things that happen. So I'm like, yeah, it is kind of the same story, but they're not comparable because they're not even really the same genre, from what I read, at least with Atlanta. You can obviously be the judge of that, but I think they're very different in a very good way. That if people like that story, there are now lots of different versions for them to go to.
Sure. And I think actually, I've not, as I said, I've not read Jennifer Saint's book yet, but I did read Emily Houser's book, For the Most Beautiful, and that seems to be more comparable. Atalanta disguised herself as a man to get on that crew on the Argo. So that they're the two that are more obviously kind of competing, because there's room for everyone, of course. But so I think Emily Houser's book and hers would be more going head to head, perhaps.
So which of the characters was easiest to get your head around and which was the hardest to get your head around? Because you have a lot of men in this book. Yes,
yeah. And that's difficult to, I think, just to focus on maybe 9 or 10, well, that's still a lot, but 9 or 10 of them. So I'll start with the difficulty is, as you say, trying to manage so many of them. And invariably some characters will cast a longer shadow than others. That's just how it has to be. And I think I need to accept that, really. But of course, there are 50 men on that boat. Sorry, 40 men on that boat. So you can't possibly reference all of them. So it's mainly the kind of the headline act, you know. But the easiest one was actually, I think, as I mentioned before, Idas, simply because the surviving version of that book, written in the 3rd century BC, so a long time after the voyage may have taken place. Just when Apollonius gives us, I think you're constantly looking for that hook, and when he calls Idas a braggart, I just thought, there we go. So I've got a character here who's an arrogant man. He's full of hubris. Is there going to come a point where Nemesis bites him? And so he was probably the easiest one. But again, you don't want a prime villain. You want somebody who's some shred of humanity in there. And I think that's kind of what happens with him. You start to see that actually there's a reason why he behaves like he does. And maybe a part beats beneath, you know, but fundamentally he's quite an arrogant guy and actually quite insecure. So I really liked writing that one. He really appealed. Jason was by far and away the hard one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I didn't want to create a Euripides villain. I didn't want to create a Hollywood stereotype. And so in many ways it became easier to write him almost as the, if you like, casting in a void. So everyone else kind of how they behave around him creates the kind of the character that you want to just sort of ultimately, it becomes an obvious portrayal, really. That's not really a very good explanation, but he really evolved a lot more, whereas the others I had a clearer picture of exactly how I wanted them to behave and how I wanted them to speak and what their capabilities were and so on. But yeah, Jason was a tricky one, really a tricky one.
I would have thought that Heracles was the most difficult, because I find him, at least with Jason, again, I'm not a writer, so I don't know why I'm giving my opinion, but when it comes to Jason, like you say, even when you read an Apollonius, like all of my notes when I'm 16 is like, why is this man running something? Like I went back and looked at them and it's like, oh, he's more than happy with this person to take over and he's very happy to sit back and do this. And so there is that insecurity to a character that you can kind of get into, I imagine. Whereas with Heracles, he's this big brute of a man that doesn't really seem to have any of that on the surface. We know his backstory is horrendous, so he's probably carrying a lot of that. But I would imagine that would be so much more difficult to tap into and to be like, this is the character, and I've got him to a T.
Yeah, I just wanted a really larger than life character, really. Somebody who's just becoming a bit old and is aware of the fact that if he doesn't get a heroic feat under his belt, he might be too old. And again, there's an arrogance there, and I quite like Hylas, his companion. That in many ways, just having a younger guy that could sort of just occasionally offer little digs at him, and Hylas being the brains, and Heracles being the brawn. I think that felt like quite a nice little sort of a nice kind of pairing, really. But he wasn't so difficult. And that first scene of him, the Caledonian, carrying the boar on his shoulders through Mycenae, he was and just kind of flicking his hair and spraying sweat everywhere. I think that was quite an easy one to sort of, once you got him down on that first sort of couple of pages. It was quite an easy one actually. He was the bit of sort of light relief. And it's a shame to let him go, actually, because, of course, he has to. Most versions don't have him completing the journey, so he had to go at some point, as did Hylas, unfortunately. So I was sorry to see him go, and he left he left quite a void. So other people have to sort of step up to that a little bit to fill the gaps. And Melier, and they all do to a degree. They certainly miss his capabilities as a warrior, and it also shows. Now there are some when you do a lot of research when you're trying to write, and a lot of scholars seem to think that the Jason voyage is an element of the old Bronze Age coming to an end in the form of Heracles, and a different type of archaic kind of hero in the form of Jason being more of a thinking man, cerebral man, coming to the fore. Some people think that actually the Heracles Jason friction is the end of an era. So I thought that was quite an interesting angle as well. The problem with Jason, of course, is described as mechanos, meaning he's got it's completely resourceless compared to someone like Odysseus, who's the exact opposite. So it makes it difficult with Jason. You think, well, his main epithet is that he's got no guile at all. So brilliant. How do we go around that, without making him a completely sort of hopeless character? He's got to have something. And I think that the fact that he kind of learns to be a man, there is something inside that needs tapping into. That was my angle with it, really.
Well, two other characters I wanted to talk about, who I guess they're not opposite one another, but on parts of the story they are, is Hypsipyle and Medea. Because Hypsipyle is a character I've loved since I first read it. Not because I think she's a good person, I want to make that very clear. Hypsipyle is a little bit of a psycho, and all the other ladies on Lemnos are a little bit psycho as well, and that's putting it incredibly lightly. But it's such a fascinating story. Like, her mythology is so interesting, and I feel like it gets glossed over so much that all these women just woke up and were like, we're just gonna kill all these men. Like, whether they get infused by a goddess or not, it's bizarre. So that must have been like, I have been waiting for somebody to take her on. That must have been so fun for you to just be like, all right, let's get into these terrifying ladies and put all these men on this island and see how it goes. Like, what was that like for you?
That's a really good question. I still think there is probably there's a book needs writing. You can see it, can't you? A Hypsipyle by a Pat Barker or Jennifer or somebody else, just something new. It needs writing. I absolutely love that. I love writing that, and it probably, because of that, it was extended a little bit. But I just wanted I wanted a strong female character, because if you're not careful, a boat full of men can get a little bit samey. So you need somebody like that, really. And I thought my was that there was almost something a bit Amazonian about her. That all of the women have to stand up for themselves. Their first sighting is of warriors. They're dressed in the full bronze armor. They go bravely to head off Jason on the expectation that they're raiders or pirates, which in some ways they are. But the important thing was to get the reason why would they kill all of the menfolk, without being really without spelling it out too much. And I think that the backstory of their men onto their new sort of wildcat women was the way forward for that. You've got to be a little bit mad to do what they did, or desperate. What do they have to do to earn being massacred? Parading women around and insulting. I think that was the way to do it. I really liked Hypsipyle. And as I say, definitely someone needs to write the book that gives a whole story to her. And she's not gone yet. The story in book 3 in Hades, I'm not quite finished yet. She will reappear in that, because I didn't want to let her go, really.
I'm so excited for that then.
She's quite a lot older, so, but then, as is Medea at the time, so they both meet again. That's going to be one of the stories in that. But Medea's one, and you get a lot of criticism. It's interesting that people think that these characters are almost like their own intellectual property. That no, that's not Medea. This is how Medea should be. She should be this, and this. But that's part of the beauty of writing these stories. That it's nobody's intellectual property at all, and that's the whole version. That's the whole attraction in many ways of that oral storytelling. That they evolve, they change over time, and one's own perception is reality. Really, yeah, that I think Medea was a little harder in that respect.
Well, I've seen. I mean, I know that people get very protective of Medea, anyways. Like,
yes,
which is, I get it. Like, for everybody who's watching, like, I totally get that people love her. She's such a powerful character. That's amazing. But at the same time, you have to let the reins go a little bit, because that's sort of the point of writing. That then you can reinterpret, you can then rewrite, in the same way that Madeline Miller took Achilles and Patroclus. Patroclus is a totally different character in the Song of Achilles. That's okay. That's her interpretation of the story. It's different. It's just what works for her book. And Medea, I loved her in your book because she kind of reminded me of, like, Jason's so young and he sees this foreign girl for the first time and he's completely distracted because she's foreign and he's never seen anyone that looks like her. And so getting her from that lens, because I think it's so easy to hate Jason, like, how could you treat her like this? And it's like, well, he's completely blinded by how hot she is, like, essentially. That's it.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Like, he's a young man. Like, okay, I'm not saying it's fine how he treated her. I don't want anyone to come for me in the comments right now, but I understand the first part of the story. And I think that's important to constantly also refer back to. Yeah.
She's got to survive in the Bronze Age as a woman, and not only survive and thrive, and you've got to have something about you, and in her case, be prepared to do whatever it takes to survive and to maintain her worship of Hecate, and not to be overawed by a patriarchal society of quite brutal men. She's got sort of the ability with it was difficult because trying to keep this as historical fiction, she can't all of a sudden become like a warlock. I suppose more in the sense of Circe, even though I've not read Circe at the time, that she's got a complete command of potion, herbs and poisons and medicines, and those are the things that she wanted to compromise. But when various people try and mistreat her, I really wanted her to have a kind of a really sort of powerful way of coming back at them.
Well, that was something that I haven't uploaded my Jason review. When this comes out, it is out. But it's coming out next week. And one thing that I mentioned in my review of Jason was how, because you have made this historical fiction, she can't, as you were saying, suddenly turn into a warlock. Like, you've got to ground somebody who is a witch in the real world. So how do you do that? Like, that's a whole other can of worms to then take apart. Whereas the Medea that I feel like a lot of people are in love with is the witch, is the very powerful sorceress who can conjure up anything on the spot and then rides away on dragons, you know, like, that's great, but that's also fantasy. Like, you can't have that suddenly pop up in your book. So you've got to tackle her in a totally different way. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Like, when I was reading through a bunch of those reviews, I was very much like, okay, well, you didn't get that it was historical fiction then.
Yeah, and that's obviously a whole other world, isn't it, with reviews, and you develop a thick skin to that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because most of the retellings are, of course, are fantastical, aren't they? Because, you know, they've got the almost Harryhausen sort of gods, goddesses, manipulating the lives of men, and once you've gone down the historical fiction path, as you say, you can't really change from that. I want just a sort of a very, very faint element of supernatural underneath it all, and that was, you know, so the voices in Jason's head, are they real? Is he suffering from some kind of affliction? Are there actually gods at work? And you do get a hint of that in Jason. So I wanted to ask that. I still wanted to ask those questions about gods, goddesses, the idea of free will and so on. But with, you know, being faithful to the kind of the historical fiction angle. So yeah. Now, in many ways, Medea is the Circe episode is quite brief, but I wanted to sort of almost see Medea through the looking glass by Circe on the island. Well, I didn't call it Aea, of course, in the Black Sea. So that was more the opportunity to sort of see the darker side, perhaps, of somebody like Medea, without kind of without sort of making Medea a sort of pantomime villain, if you like. So you can sort of see what she could be capable of, because how she interacts with a blood relative, just raises that sort of, sows that seed of doubt about what Medea is capable of when Jason, basically Jason peaks at the end of that voyage, of course, doesn't he? Pretty much everything after that, his career goes fairly spectacularly downhill. So he's got to get his comeuppance at some point. But you just want to see hints of that, and I think the Circe episode was kind of an element of that.
Great. So thank you so much for joining me today to chat about your wonderful books, Argo and Jason, and get that little sneak peek of Hades, which comes out in 2023 or 2024.
Yeah, about October, I think, 2023. Yeah.
Amazing. So you guys can check out the other 2 books in the series, though, in the description below. There are all the links down there, and also Mark's Instagram account and Twitter account if you guys want to go and keep updated straight from Mark himself. So thank you again, and we'll be seeing you guys next time with more videos here on Monique. So I'll see you guys then.